acknowledge the cultures we live in, because I think that's such a large part of forming who we are as human beings. And my perception of modern culture, especially Western culture, is that it's one that has taught us to be very cognitive these days, and has actually disconnected us from and taught us not to trust our inner knowing in ourselves and our bodies, and to really rely on cognition and intellectual knowledge as the true way of knowing whether something is right or wrong, and it fails us actually quite often in these places in our personal lives. And if we want to refer to self-knowing as intuition or gut feeling, there's all these different words and they have similar qualities. But I think for me, all of them acknowledge the relationship between body and mind, and if you choose to acknowledge it, spirit. So I think for me, what I'm offering to people is, we as a starting point, like as an absolute foundational decision, we need to decide to make enough space for our self-knowing to actually start existing again. Because right now in the modern world, it has no space. There's no room for it. And in our daily lives, if they continue just as most of them do, then there's no room or support for our self-knowing to even start coming out. And so if you want to be able to hear it, if you actually want to start getting into contact with it, there needs to be moments in your day, moments in your interaction, practices, where you get to try actually living by your self-knowing a little bit, instead of living by the ideas and the cognition that we're taught to make every decision through. And so on a practical level, I think, the pausing that breath gives us in interaction is a really important moment to pause for long enough to say, well, what do I feel, rather than what do I just think? I think in daily life, it's about perhaps deciding on a few things and creating space for, what if I make that decision from some more feeling rather than just thinking? And, I know lots of practitioners and people who make decisions through their self-pleasure practice. They take a matter to their self-pleasure and they wait for the answer to come out of that. And I don't do that as much. I've done it at times, but even things like, if I have a decision to make, recording me saying the two options on my phone, and then sitting there taking a few breaths and playing the recording back to myself, and not being in the thinking about it, but just being like, how do I feel when I listen to those two options? What comes up for me? And I've supported, friends and clients at times to actually just pause for a moment, to listen to my words, to take some breaths and say, well, what would it be like if you did this? And what would it be like if you did that? And they go, oh God, I feel so excited by that option. Or like, oh, that feels shit. Like, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, yeah, right. So you would just feel into it. Like, you just actually gave yourself a moment to feel about it, instead of like, well, what makes sense and what should I do? And what does that person need from me? And blah, blah, blah. There's so much noise, and we've been taught so much that tells us not to pause, that says there's not time to pause. There's not wisdom there. There's not value there. Keep moving. And so, yeah, my encouragement on many levels is to take the space for it, and take the space in relationship, take the space in your personal life, utilize some of the practices that have been mentioned here, or find your own that work for you.
Thank you. I'm a huge fan of the pause. So thank you.
Yeah, I just love that, Jordon. Right. I think it's a revolutionary act to go from our heads anywhere else. It's just not a supported paradigm. And so I love, it speaks to me to be a revolutionary, a feeling, loving revolutionary, and to create that space for that in a really intentional way. I'm so glad you brought that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll add that for me, the pace of social interactions generally is way too fast for me. And that there is, like, just to put different words to what you already were saying, there's like a nervous system charge that is like intense and speeds me up in making decisions where I feel uncomfortable oftentimes. And like what Christina was saying earlier, that the no and the maybe feel kind of uncomfortable. I find when I feel uncomfortable, I speed up and I tense up in both of that. And I don't give myself the capacity, like the tension keeps me from feeling. It kind of squeezes me up into my head.
Yeah.
And so like anything that I can do to slow myself down and to take that breath has for me just been in so much service to really getting my true answer.
I just want to thank you so much, Matt. I just want to jump in quickly because I know that, you know, what I said earlier, we are engaging in such spiritual ways in some of our language and stuff. And the thing about some of my study that's really excited me is it's plugged it through a neuroscience lens. And so when you talk about tension and that inability to feel in those moments, and I absolutely have that experience, I think it's really valuable for any listeners or watchers to know that on a neurological level, when our muscles tense, when our bodies hold tension, they're literally squeezing our nerves so that we can feel less sensation in our bodies. And so, you know, forget whatever you want to forget about things that don't resonate with you. If you're really going to just like look through science, then on a neurological level, if you want to feel things, if you want to know things through your body, then you need to take the space and the breath and enough room to actually feel again, because we're walking around in chronic tension and we can't feel in that space much.
I've noticed in myself resistance to pause and trust sometimes, because it's just not something I felt like I was ever taught. So for a long time, it felt like, yeah, like a pause is a waste of time. I need to think about it more. And so it's been a practice of just trusting and taking time to just pause and trust that the answer is going to come, just coming back to your body. Yeah, so I think that's huge as a practice, just coming back to the pause and trusting. Oh, I loved your suggestion for recording yourself, Jordon. That's a really interesting way. I feel that I've kind of done that with someone else before, talked about it and felt into it. So that's a neat way to empower yourself to be able to really do that on your own and record and then just really drop into the feel of what you're trying to decide on. So thank you.
Yeah, I feel like I just want to acknowledge for everyone and for myself as well that, like, because you mentioned trust, Tova, and it's so freaking hard. Like, I feel like I want to congratulate everyone and also remind people that, like, we're working against some pretty significant forces when we actually choose to trust and take the time. Like, because there's a lot inside us and even more out in the world that's screaming, it's not worth it, don't do it, it's wrong. Like, so you're taking a radical revolutionary step in saying, I'm going to try giving it some space for a moment. Like, whether or not anything comes out of it, that alone is, yeah, revolutionizing what's happening inside our own conditioning and culture.
Right. Yeah, I love that, especially because I feel like a lot of times our everyday culture or society like validates the opposite of that. So you have to keep coming back to remembering and practicing.
And I think it's just an important awareness to have, that we're holding, that we're doing things that are challenging. Like, so it's not to stop doing it or to whatever, but it's in those moments of like, oh, it feels so hard. It's like, yeah, it is hard, and that's okay. Like, and keep going.
Yeah, I'm thinking, Christina, that all of us work with others. Mm-hmm. And what a gift it is to create, you know, what the ICF calls spaciousness in our work with others. So creating a container in which there is pause for the people that we work with and interact with, you know, whether they're clients or, you know, intimate relationships, and how it's a blessing, right? It's giving this other human being permission to pause in a world where many of us feel we don't have permission, right? And that's huge. And even for ourselves to pause and to slow it down when we are working with other people. I mean, I mentor a lot of coaches and they keep telling me, like, I feel like I have to give value, so I'm going to talk really fast because otherwise, you know, they're not going to pay me the big money because, and yeah, and it's training. We've been trained to do that, right? We've been trained to do that. I have too, right? I come from academe, and so I was trained to talk fast too. And so when we step back and slow it down, we're actually giving everyone permission to do that. Such a gift.
Thank you for that.
For me, there's also a component of safety that needs to be there in order to take that pause. I find that so often when we're speeding up, there's some like below surface emotion that's there that's really intense. And when we do pause, then the tears come. They're just like right there. Or then, you know, the fear or the anger is just like right there under the surface. And so taking the pause also requires us to have safety. And like Tova was saying, trusting ourselves to go into that more intense, more authentic, real experience.
I want to read what Wendy put in the chat. So Wendy said a while ago, seeing a self without judgment, just seeing what is, and bringing that to any form of relating. Yeah. Huge. And then pause takes training. Yeah. I think so too. It's one of my, it's layered in my practices, those pauses.